We're going to be looking at several slides tonight as we talk about a subject that was assigned to me, and that is understanding the generations that we disciple, and then the boomers, generations X, Y, and Z. I'll be honest with you, when Brian told me that that was my topic, because all the other topics had already been taken, when he told me my topic was that, I go, what? What? I said, I'm going to have some help on that one, because I just knew that I was a baby boomer. I didn't know that much about generations X, Y, and Z. And even now, there's another one that's added. It's the Alpha generation, the most recent generation that has been born. So anyway, I know a little bit more about it now than I did. But I appreciate the opportunity of being here with you tonight. I hope that the things that we'll share will be challenging to us. I understand for the past 4 weeks you have been going through a seminar or having the same speaker to teach how to be evangelistic, how we make disciples, how we're able to teach, and learn the mechanics of doing personal work. And I think that's great. We need to be taught those fundamental principles as to how to ask questions, how to answer questions when we're asked. We need to be taught those things, the mechanics of how to do personal work, and open up doors of opportunities. And I know that you enjoyed having the brother here that was able to speak to you for, I think, 4 weeks in that particular seminar. And so tonight, as we talk about making disciples among all of the different generations and understanding how we together today are able to make disciples from all of these different generations, I hope that the lesson that I have planned will be helpful to us, and that we can gain insight into how we can make disciples with all of the different generations of people. As I look out among you here tonight, I see several over here. Joey Bryan's over here, and I look out and I see a variety of ages of people. You look up there and you may say, well, that's me. That generation such and so is me. What I want to do tonight, and I'm not so much into categorizing people. I hope that's okay. Because the purpose of my lesson tonight is not to stand up here and tell you about Generation X. You know, what some author writes about Generation X or Y or Z. Because as I began to read after several different authors, here's what I found. They couldn't agree. They couldn't agree. What one would say about Generation Y, another one would say about Generation X or Generation Z or so forth. So this lesson tonight is not going to be where we categorize young people or young adults or even those of us who are the baby boomers. That's not the purpose of my coming here tonight to present that kind of lesson to you. But what I did do in preparing for this lesson is I went back and I thought it would be helpful to us to be able to go back and see some of the things that were happening in the era in which people were born. Okay? Let's go back and look and see what was happening in the times. And we're even going to go one step further back than the baby boomers. We're going to go back to what has been referred to as the greatest generation of all. Okay? And we're going to talk all the way back to the year 1900. We're going to look at this rather quickly. I've got a lot of slides tonight that I want to show before we get into our lesson, as we just give some of this is trivia, okay? Is that all right? If we just do some trivia? And then some of it is historical. So first of all, as we look at it, can you imagine what it is that people who were born in the early 1900s, what they have seen in their life? What they have experienced in their life? Not too long ago, I had a friend of mine that we've known for several years. Kathy and I have known for several years. Her name is Debbie Clay. Debbie married a faithful gospel preacher, Brother John Henry Clay. Brother Clay was an African-American minister, a great mentor to me, a great friend of our family. His wife lives down in Valdosta, Georgia. I was talking to Debbie here back, I guess it was in February, and I was asking about her parents. She said, well, my dad has passed away, but my mom's still living. She said, Rick, you won't believe my mom. She's going to turn 100 years of age on May the 11th. I said, you got to be kidding me. And she said, she don't look a day over 70. You know, don't look a day over 70. She's going to turn 100 years of age on May the 11th. I put it in my calendar. I wanted to call her on May the 11th and wish her a happy birthday, which I did. She answered the phone. I thought I was talking to her daughter, Debbie, you know. And I began to talk with her. You know who came away blessed because of that conversation? I did. Talking about how many sunrises she has seen and sunsets that she has seen and all of the things, the events that she has experienced in her life. You know, as I talk to a 100-year-old lady, and I've not talked to many of them, you know, have you? I haven't talked to many 100-year-old people, but I tell you what, I was amazed at her strength and her tenacity that she had, even in her voice. Even at that age. And she was having a good day on her birthday. But can you imagine what it would be like talking to a person and asking them, can you tell us about the events of your life? They would tell us, well, if they were born in the early 1900s, you've got World War I, you've got the stock market crash, which brought on the Great Depression, then you've got World War II, and then you've got the Spanish flu. I can remember back whenever this plague came about in our country, back in February, March, talking with one of my cousins, and she reminded me about my grandmother, my mom's mom, how that in her childhood that she lived through the Spanish flu, and that every day she would have to boil their clothes to keep the germs down. Now this was a young lady, a teenage girl, having to boil their clothes in order to kill the germs to keep it from coming into their household. Fortunately, there was none in our family whose life was taken by the Spanish flu, but it killed how many? It killed 20 million people worldwide. The Spanish flu did. It killed 500,000 right here in the United States back in the early 1900s. So if we were to be talking with somebody that was of that age, can you imagine how the conversation would go when we would be talking about making disciples with them? Because they're going to be looking at everything from a perspective from what they have come through, what they have experienced, what their mindset is, etc. They're going to be looking at everything through those tinted glasses, right? Have you ever known somebody that was born and went through the Great Depression that was a spendthrift?
Mm-hmm. My great aunt.
I'm sorry. Most people who have lived through this Great Depression, what do, folks? They're saving, right? They're saving their money. That's right, they're saving their money. Most of them are. Now, some are not, but most of them are that I've ever met with who lived through the Great Depression. They're saving their money. They're putting their cash somewhere, maybe under a pillow, maybe under the mattress, digging a hole outside and putting it in a can. I don't know where they're putting it, but that's what they're doing. They're saving their money because they know that hard times can come at any point in time, right? So they're more apt to save than a lot of people in generations born since. Here are some of the values that people born in that era would have in their life. Number one, they're hard workers. They can tell you about the hard work that they were involved in. They worked together as teams to help one another out. They sacrificed in their lifetime. They had this motto, let's do less with more. Or let's do more with less, rather. Let's do more with less. That was their motto, and that's exactly what they did. You go back and look at their homes, look at their furniture, look at the things they grew up with, and you'll see that they were able to do a lot with very little, right? They have respect for authority. That is, those born in that era have respect for authority. And then also they are very patriotic because of the sacrifices they made for their country during World War I and World War II. Because everybody sacrificed. If you wasn't on the front lines fighting in the battle and the wars, you were back home, you were working in factories, you were sacrificing things that you were born in your house, you were sacrificing it to go to the military in order that they might be able to fight the wars they were having. So to live and to talk with somebody in that era, boy, that would be something, wouldn't it? Now you compare that era to the present day. today? Can you see where there's going to be a lot of differences there? Can you see where there might even be a communication breakdown there, you know? Because again, one's looking at it from this perspective and maybe talking about a particular subject, whereas this one over here, they don't even know what they're talking about. And that's no fault of their own. We just were born at different eras of time. Let's look at another one. The baby boomers. I'm talking about myself, born in 1955. And so as I put this together, here are some of the things I wanted to make mention of. That after the baby boomers, rightly called, because after the war, when the men were able to come back home again, there was newfound prosperity that came about in the early 60s, late 50s and early 60s. Newfound prosperity, because now those men who had been off to war and or ladies who had been off to war were now coming back home, and they were taking up their jobs that they had left. They were able to make a decent living, working in the factories, etc. And so they were able to have more and do more. Well, even in that day and time, guess what, young people? Y'all used to sit over here. Young people, guess what? In that day and time, they had black and white televisions. I had a black and white TV. I was the remote. Rick, turn the channel. Rick, turn up the volume. Rick, turn down the volume. Okay? Go outside and turn the antenna. We don't want Chattanooga tonight. We want Atlanta. So if you wanted to watch Atlanta, you had to go outside and turn the antenna. We wanted to watch Chattanooga again, you had to go outside and turn the antenna. Because there was no such thing as Dish Network or DirecTV at that point in time, right? And so, again, or either you had rabbit ears, you know, some people, but living in the mountains of North Georgia, guess what? Rabbit ears didn't do you much good over there, you know, coming over those mountain tops. And then the thing that was really interesting, growing up as a child and being mischievous as I would be, I know it's hard for you to believe, but as being mischievous, we had what we called a party line. That means, young people, that the phone was actually attached to the wall. And there was actually a line from the wall to wherever that receiver was at. So there was no such thing as a private call, right? Not even within your own house. And if you had 6 people, 6 different families sharing the same line, guess what? There was nothing you said that was safe. Because people could pick up. You might not hear them, and here you are talking about X, Y, Z, or somebody, or a certain event, or whatever, and you got somebody that's eavesdropping because you have a party line. Do you remember the first time when a private line came available? Well, that was a good thing, wasn't it? When you had private lines, nobody else could eavesdrop on you. But I'll never forget, my mom and dad lived on one side of the driveway. My grandmother lived on the other side of the driveway. And my brother's 3 years older than I am. And back when he's 3 years older, so he began to have an interest in girls. And he would go up to my grandmother's and call. And I would sneak in our house, and I'd pick up the phone and listen. Now, see, that's being the mischievous part, right? But you can be thankful for now you got private lines in the cell phone era, and so that's where we've come from. But let's look on. The baby boomers. What happened during that time? You had that of the Vietnam War. The Vietnam War. We'll have more to say about that in a moment. In the baby boomer era, you have that of the time when John Glenn was the first astronaut to orbit the Earth. You know, that was told us by our political leaders that we're going to go put people in orbit. We're going to put somebody on the moon. That we're in the space age. We're progressing. And then in the baby boomer era, we had houses that had front porches. Now, my wife's watching on YouTube right now. And she would tell you, I'm going to be our spokesperson tonight, but she would tell you the reason so many families are in trouble today, and the reason there are more homes that are ending, more marriages ending in divorce, and problems with kids, etc., that can come about, is because we're building homes today that does not have a front porch. We've got 2 daughters, and she'll tell you that whenever our kids was growing up, that they would spill their hearts sitting on the front porch in a rocking chair or in a porch swing. And whenever a house don't have a front porch, there's not that kind of a place for a child to feel free and at liberty enough to be able to share what's going on in their life. I think she's got a good point, don't you? Because we do need our front porches. We do need that space when families can be together. And if you come by our house at any point in time, and we live right on Highway 25, you'll find that we got a porch swing and 2 porch rockers. Why, we've even been known to be out there swinging and rocking in November with a blanket. That's how much we like our front porch, okay? So, if houses would start building front porches, guess what? I think families would be closer together, right? Okay, let's look at another one. Generation X. This is whenever people were born from 65 to 79. 65 to 79. I look at that, and I was about 10 years of age at this point in time, and society became more transit at this point. You know? People became more transit in the mid-60s because they were able, with that newfound financial freedom, because they've come back from the war, they've got a good job, they've been able to buy a property, build them a house, buy a car, etc. Now they've got more freedom that they can enjoy. You remember those days? And then, instead of staying right here within our county or within our own state, we could go somewhere. We could take a day trip. We could go to Atlanta and visit. We could go to Chattanooga. We could go to Cleveland, Tennessee. There and back in the same day. So we became a lot more mobile during the mid-early 60s, right? Because of this, of the financial affluence that was happening at that point in time compared to eras gone by. Here's the next point that happened during that era is in November of 1965, our country sent 90,000 troops to Vietnam. 90,000 troops. Now, I'm going to tell you about that. One of those was our neighbor. One of those was our neighbor. He went to Vietnam. Really good friends. That family had 3 boys. The oldest one is the one that went to Vietnam. I would never know the agony that his mom went through not being able to hear from Charles while he was in Vietnam. Because you see, they didn't have email. They didn't have faxes back then that they were accessible to. There was months and months and months without ever hearing from her son that was in Vietnam. Now I want to ask you something. When you start talking to them about the Bible, do you see where they might be coming from? Again, look at the experience. Look at the things that's happening in their life. Look at what they've come through. Look at the challenges that they're facing. Look at the disappointments and the discouragements. And you look at them and you're going to hear that because of the things they have encountered. It's going to be different than talking with a present day person. You agree with that? Because of everything they've gone through. So whenever we talk about how we disciple these people, we need to consider what it is that they have come through, the storms, if you will, the storms that they have weathered. Let's look at another. Generation X, again, 65 to 79. Here's a little bit of trivia. Days of computer. In the days of computer, it was coming on in that particular era. In 1975, Kathy and I was at Alabama Christian College, now Faulkner University, and while we were students, we worked in the business office. After we graduated, we got married, we continued working in the business office, and I was the payroll clerk for the college. As a matter of fact, for the elementary school, as well as the support personnel, as well as for the college employees, the instructors, etc. I was the payroll clerk. I'll never forget when I went into that position and I was trained to do that work, that doing the payroll, you do it by hand, right? I mean, you actually handwrite a check, right? Well, you know, what the school wanted to do is they wanted to progress a little bit. So after 2 years of being in that position, writing their checks, having to type every W-2 by hand at the end of every year, you know, that was a challenge, right? After 2 years, they decided we're going to hire a computer company to do our payroll. I was so thankful. But times changed a lot because you know what happened back then? Is I would take a transmittal, that is a sheet sheet of paper. I'd put their names. I would put the salary they would have and any deductions that would be coming out of that, what they claim, 1 or 2 or 3 dependents, etc. And I would carry those little sheets of paper, a stack about that high, I would carry them over to this computer company on the Eastern Bypass, and I would hand it to a person that in turn would take those sheets of paper and they would enter it on a tape, a big round tape, looked like a reel where a movie would come on, okay? And they would keep punching in, put it on that tape, and then that tape goes into a room that was like 60 degrees year round, okay? And then from that tape, they would be able to run our payroll. I'd go back over the next day, I'd pick up our payroll checks. I really liked it come W-2 time because it was a no-brainer, right? But you know, how far have we come since then as far as computers go? Because back then they were saying that a computer chip is able to double the amount of info on that chip every 2 years. My, how we have come. Do you know that tonight, here it is, that tonight, not much bigger than the tip of a pen can hold thousands and thousands and thousands of megabytes of information, not much bigger than the tip of this pen? My, how times have changed since then, right? Again, look where we've come. Look at the generation that we're bringing on now with computers. Back then, there was popular shows like, you get this, Smothers Brothers. Anybody remember them? The Smothers Brothers? Yeah, we do, don't we? Y'all go say, what? And then there's Hogan's Heroes, you know. Hogan's Heroes. Then Get Smart. You remember him talking in his shoe? And things that we thought was only a dream has become reality now, right? And then I Dream of Jeannie. Some of those were some of the TV shows that were popular back in that era. Then we go to another generation, Generation Y, born in 1980 to 1994. Now we're getting on up here where we got some people living today, right? In 1983, what happened? Technology became real in a bigger way because in 1983, the internet was born. What does that mean? That means that in 1983, for the first time, one computer was able to communicate with another computer and not be at the same location. Isn't that amazing? One computer being able to communicate with another, maybe even a different kind of computer at a different location. That's what happened in 1983. And the world has never been the same since. But my next sentence is, in 1990, we have the World Wide Web. We've got the World Wide Web. We've got the internet itself and the World Wide Web and how that has changed this country, right? And how that it has changed the world Wide Web. As a matter of fact, we think we can't live without the internet today, right? But then also in this era, our young people, and those of you who are young at heart, remember a video arcade game by the name of Pac-Man. You remember that? Got anybody out here remember it? Anybody back? Okay, we got some folks over here that's younger than some of the folks out here, okay? But anyway, yes, y'all remember that, right? And then how about the Rubik's Cube? You remember that? Oh yeah, that was a challenge to put that thing together. Well, that happened in 1980 to 1994. Again, this is some of the challenges and some of the things that happened. And then we have the Gulf War, August of 1990. You remember when that was happening? The Gulf War? And then a horrible thing that happened in January of 1986. Those of you who are old enough to remember, you probably remember where you were at when you heard the news about the shuttle accident that happened to the Challenger in 1986, January the 28th, 1986. And how horrible that was for many reasons, right? But on board that particular ship was the first teacher that was going into space, Christy McCullough. She was on board the Challenger on that day. You probably remember where you was at. Kathy and I lived in Saraland, Alabama. We were in line to go through the bank and through the drive-through whenever it came over the radio. The Challenger had exploded. That was horrible. Again, this dates us as to where our time has gone. Then we look at Generation Z, and that is from 1995 to 2015. That is, they were born at the turn of the century. That's right. Look at that. Born at the turn of the century, and then electronics now has become much more a part of their everyday life, because you've got computers, you've got tablets, smartphones, etc. All of that now is a part of these people's lives that were born in this era. And the internet becomes more and more a part of their everyday life, to be able to function even. If the internet's down, some people are just stuck, right? Many companies today, when their internet goes down, what happens? They're just stuck. They're not able to do. When a bank's internet goes down, people are stuck. They can't get any information. So we're becoming more and more dependent, it seems, on that of the internet. That, again, is an era in which people were born. Well, we got Generation Z. Here's another thing I want to share before we jump into the lesson quickly. We know what happened on 9/11, don't we? We remember that fateful day, when our country was attacked in multiple locations. That brought about over 3,000 deaths and 6,000 injuries. We know what happened on that day, and because of that attack on our soil, we know that ever since then we've been involved in some kind of war against terrorism in some ways, in some locations overseas. And then you remember, and we all do this, I'm sure, the day when Katrina hit the Gulf Coast. And we saw with our own eyes the city of New Orleans flooded. Housetops, could barely see a housetop. You saw helicopters rescuing mamas and grandmothers and granddaddies and children from rooftops, because the water had come in so quickly. We all witnessed that. And we all felt for those people that were in that situation. But imagine this. Again, can you imagine talking with somebody, having a conversation with somebody who lived through that? Who didn't know if they were going to be able to penetrate the ceiling, to be able to get outside, to get on top of the roof where they could be rescued, and they thought their life was ending. Can you imagine having a conversation with some of those people? Well, tonight we talk about this present generation. The first generation, now look at this, and I had never thought of it until preparing for this lesson, but those who were born in 2010 up to the present time, this is the first generation of people that will be completely immersed, and I say completely, immersed in technology their entire lives. They will. Almost a year ago, September the 5th, Kathy and I had our second grandbaby, a little girl. Hardly a year old. She was over at our house the other day, and she had my wife's smartphone, her iPhone, and you know that she's already able to know that you just do this, and she knows what that does to that phone. You know, she loves a remote control to the TV. Not even a year old yet. I'll be glad to show you some pictures after it's over if you'd like. But anyway, we look at smartphones, tablets, and we got iPads, we got apps. You know, apps. First time you ever heard that, what'd you think it was? An app. You know? Now you got a smartphone or a computer, you know what apps are, right? Applications. And then social media. Some people live on social media, some for the good and some for the bad. Need to be careful about that social media thing, don't we? But anyway, and then notice, they don't know, nor they can never imagine what their life would be without their electronics. And it's only going to get more and more and more and more and more involved. But now, I said all that to say this. As I've gone through, and I've tried to bring it up a time or two as I've gone through this scenario, look at the statement on the screen now. And that is that today our attitudes, our behaviors, our expectations in our life, and our expectations of others, our habits, our values, our motivation, all of these things are developed in our lives at the time in our life when our life was most formative, when we were young in life, regardless of what era we were born in, right? So we are today a culmination of everything that we have experienced, seen, heard, done, had done to us. We are the culmination of everything that has happened to us in the past. And so when we talk about making disciples of all of these different generations, we do need to understand that we're coming from different eras where different things happen in our lives and to our families, different challenges that we had to face, etc. And these were all national challenges. I'm not even talking about the individual challenges of cancer. Used to be, you never heard that word, did you? I mean, I can remember back in the 60s, it was almost never spoken at our house that so-and-so died with cancer. But now it's almost a daily thing that we learn that somebody has cancer. And so we're talking about people who are coming from different backgrounds. So what is it that remains constant? And here's what remains constant, folks. That as we make disciples of these people from the various generations in which we've studied tonight, there's one common denominator. And I'm not talking about finances. There's one common denominator. And I'm not talking about education. There's one common denominator. And I'm not talking about physical goods that we leave to our children and grandchildren in a will. There's one common denominator that brings us all together, regardless of when we were born, at whatever era that we talk about, whatever generation that we're talking about. There's one thing that brings us all together, and that is our need for God. That brings us all together at the same point. Our need for God, our need for God in our life, our need to trust God in our life, our need to teach one generation to another. And as we open our Bibles and as we look at some passages tonight, I hope you brought your Bibles with you because we want to look at several passages. I've got most of them on the screen. There's one or two that I do not. But if you will, look at Ecclesiastes chapter 1 and verse 4, where there the wise man says, one generation passes away and another generation comes. Isn't that true? One generation passes and then another generation comes. But then, look at this. Every generation has a responsibility toward the next generation. Every generation has a responsibility to those who will come after them. That's right, we do have a responsibility toward those who are coming on, that are being born and that are being raised now. We who are older have a responsibility to those who are younger, who are coming on. Well, let's look at this. How many generations are we as a church family, how many generations are we away from apostasy? Just one. If we do not feel the need that is there and relevant in our life, the church is prone to leaving and separating from the truth. The church is prone to leaving the truth of the Word of God and to accept the wishes and the whims of man, to teach the doctrines and the commandments of men rather than that of God. So we do have a responsibility. Look at Deuteronomy chapter 4, verse 9. Only take heed to yourself. Now notice how many ands are in this passage. Look at it. How many things that he ties into this one passage, that Moses ties into this one passage. He says, only take heed to yourselves and diligently keep yourself. That is, you need to watch out for yourself. That phrase, take heed, is found 128 times throughout the Old and New Testament. You know what that literally means? Be careful. Be careful. Be careful. The Bible tells us repeatedly, Old and New Testament, that we need to be very careful. So be careful. Take heed to yourself and diligently keep yourself. Keep your soul. Guard yourself, he says, lest you forget. Are we prone to forget, folks? Are we prone to forget today? I am. I'll be honest with you, I am. I have to write things down. I have to make a note of things or I'm apt to forget. He says here, lest you forget the things your eyes have seen. Now keep in mind, it was Moses challenging the children of Israel about the things that they had seen, especially when God delivered them out of the land of Egypt, from the hand of the enemy Pharaoh. Keep in mind what you have seen, lest they depart from your heart all the days of your life, and teach them to your children and to your grandchildren. You see, there's generational teaching, where we go from one generation to another generation to another generation. That's what Deuteronomy chapter 4 and verse 9 says, that we make disciples by teaching our children and our grandchildren. Let's look at another passage. Look at Deuteronomy chapter 6 and verse 2. I love this passage here and one that comes after it. Deuteronomy chapter 6 and verse 2. That you may fear the Lord your God and keep all His statutes and His commandments, which now count with me, there's one, which I command you, number two, and your son, that's the third generation, and he goes on to say, and your grandson, which would be the fourth generation. There's 4 generations mentioned in that one passage, that we're to do what to them? That we're to teach them the statutes and the commandments which I command you this day. Why? That your days may be prolonged. 4 generations are mentioned in that one passage. That's generational teaching, that the older teach the younger. I like that passage. Let's look here. How do we do it? When do we teach? Deuteronomy chapter 6 and verse 7. Notice the practicality of what he's teaching here. Now listen, folks. You say, Rick, those Deuteronomy passages are under the law of Moses, and you're exactly right. But let me tell you something. This is not doctrine. This is principle. Principle that we are to apply, that's applicable in the Christian dispensation. It's not having to do with how they worship back then. It's how that we are going to teach our children that which God wants us to teach. Church, is there anything today that God wants us to teach our children? Is there anything today that God wants us to teach our children? Sure there is. So if there is, when do we teach them? Notice what he says. You shall teach them diligently to your children, and shall talk of them when? When you sit in your house. How many of you got a recliner? It's okay. I know you do, right? You been in their houses? They got recliners? You got your easy chair, I know, right? You sit in your house. Then he says, when you walk by the way, you know, you ever go outside? Take a stroll outside with your grandkids, your children? When you go by the way, then he says, and also when you lie down. And then when what? When you rise up. I want to ask you, can you think of another time that's not included in those 4? There's never a time when we're not teaching our children, grandchildren. Never a time when we're not teaching them. And so that's when we're to teach this generational teaching. That you teach your son teaches his son, and then you teach the grandson. That's 4 generations that we've got coming. Well, in Psalms 100, in Psalms chapter 78, Psalms chapter 78, I know that our time is quickly going, and I'm going to go as fast as I can. But in Psalms chapter 78, we see a sad history of Israel. We see sadness there because we see how God's people treated God. We see how people that God cared for and heard them when they were suffering in the land of Egypt, and we saw the mighty, wonderful works of God that He displayed, the powerful works of God that He displayed on that occasion amongst other times, and how God's people turned from Him. It's a sad story. But you know what? Can history repeat itself? Can history repeat itself? Sure it can. That's why in the book of Romans chapter 15 that we're told that the things that were written aforetime were written for our learning. That's why Paul says in 1 Corinthians chapter 10 that the things that these things that have happened that he lists in chapter 10 verses 1 through 10, these things happen for our examples, that we don't make the same mistakes that our forefathers made, that the Israelites made, that we don't make that same mistake. So Psalms chapter 78 tells us about this. It tells us about rebellion and then how God redeemed. It tells us about sin and how God forgave them. It tells us about the wrath of God. But it also tells us about the mercy of God. We read about that in all the verses in Psalms chapter 78. We're not going to go that far tonight, but I want you to look at me in Psalms chapter 78. If you have your Bibles, turn there with me. Notice what it says. Why teach these biblical accounts? Why teach teach? Why teach all of these things? Notice what he says there in Psalms chapter 78, beginning in verse 1. Give ear, O my people, to my law. Incline your ear to the words of my mouth. He says, in other words, as a granddaddy would say to a grandson, son, listen up. Right? Son, listen up. Lean forward just a little bit. I want you to listen to what I'm about to tell you. Okay? He goes on to say, I will open my mouth in a parable. You know, this passage here was quoted by Jesus in Matthew chapter 12. When Jesus began teaching by parables, he quoted from Psalm 78, right here, that I'm going to begin teaching in parables. We know what a parable is. I will utter dark sayings of old, which we have heard and known. I'm going to teach you. I want you to listen. I want you to perk up and lean forward. I want you to pay attention to what I'm about to say. Some things you have known in the past, but you need to be what? Reminded of, right? Some things you've heard in the past, you know, but you need to be reminded of. How is it that that can be? Because he goes on to say here, which we have heard, well, we've heard it in the past, and that which we have known, but we need to be reminded. Okay? So why is it that we need to teach these biblical accounts? Sometimes in verse number 3, as it says, we need to be reminded. Look at verse number 5 as we continue our reading. We will not hide them from their children, telling to the generation to come the praises of the Lord and His strength, His wonderful works that He has done. For He established a testimony with Jacob, appointed a law in Israel, which He commanded our fathers that they should make them known to their children. Why should we teach these biblical accounts? Because we're commanded to. Why should we, the older, teach the younger? Because we're commanded to. That's why. And then notice what else it says there in verse 7. He goes on to say that they may set their hope in God and not forget the works of God, but keep His commandments. Why is it that we need to teach these biblical accounts? That generations will not do what? That generations will not forget the mighty works of God. We need to teach in our pulpits. We need to teach in our classes. We need to teach our young people the mighty works of God. Because, my friends, make no mistake about it, I know that we're 2,000 years, we're several thousand years beyond the time of this writing, for sure. But I want to tell you something. The Word of God is just as powerful today as it was then. Just as powerful today, we can learn from it just as much today as they did the fathers to whom Moses was speaking. We can learn from it. Why? Because we need to realize that, number one, we need to be reminded. Sometimes, and Brian, you may have it said to you whenever after a sermon, I'm thankful that you reminded me of some things that I had forgotten. Right? That's good. We need to remind people, right? And then we need to understand that we're commanded to teach. And we don't want our children to forget God. It's heartbreaking when you talk to parents and they say that my child has forgotten their raising. They've turned to drugs, they've turned to this, and they've turned to that, immoral lifestyle. They have forgot their raising. That's sad when a parent says that to you. Well, let's go on. When we look at Psalms chapter 78, generational teaching. Look at, we've read down through verse 5. Let's go back and look at verse number 6. He says there that the generation to come might know them, the children who would be born, that they might arise and declare them to their children, that they may set their hope in God and not forget the works of God, but keep His commandments, and may not be like their fathers, a stubborn and rebellious generation, a generation that did not set its heart aright, and whose spirit was not faithful to God. So there's a reason why we need to be teaching. This generational teaching is this. There's 5 generations that are mentioned there in these 8 verses. They're listed there for you. You talk about our Father. We talk talk about our children. Then we talk about our children's children. Then we talk about children that are yet what? Unborn. And then he mentions there in verse 6, what does he mention? Those who would be born to those who are not born yet. There is 5 generations of teaching there in those 8 verses. So we have generational teaching that we need to pass down from one generation to the other. And you may say, well, Rick, where does the church come in? Well, you know what? That's a good point, because the church is a facilitator. The church does not take the place of what happens in the home, right? The church facilitates, complements the teaching that is done by the parents inside the home. But the church needs to stand ready, needs to stand prepared, needs to be that facilitator to teach, to help that child in their growth as a Christian. Then, teaching this generation to do what? As you look there at verses 4, 5, or 6, 7, and 8, there are 4 things that we need to teach our children. Number 1, we need to teach them to know God. That's what it says there in verse 6, that generation to come might know them. That is, that we might know God, that we might know God's Word. Number 2, he says there that we need to trust God's promises. Look, if you will, verse number 7, that they may set their hope in God, that we would trust the promises of God. When you're talking to a mother who sent her child over to Vietnam back in 1965, is there any promises of God you could tell that mother? If a mom lost a son during the Afghanistan war, is there anything that you can think that would be helpful for that parent to try to console that parent who had lost? Where else do we find comfort, folks, except where? In the Word. Then we need to obey God's Word. Look there, if you will, verse number 7, he says that they may set their hope in God and not forget the works of God, but keep His commandments. And then look at verse number 8. He says, and may not be like their fathers, a stubborn, rebellious generation, a generation that did not set its heart aright and whose spirit was not faithful to God. We need to tell their children. Tell the children. That's what we need to do. Let's look on further. Lessons that we can learn tonight from what we studied, and we've gone through so much of it, and I contemplated on doing away with the first 12 slides, but I reconsidered, and I hope it's not out of place, but I wanted you to have a little bit of a forethought behind the generations that we're dealing with. God's Word must be taught to every generation. Amen? God's Word must be taught to every generation. Number 2, we must equip so that they will not forget. We need to equip our children so that they will not forget the promises, the mighty works of Almighty God. You know, today what we're talking about in the Old Testament is how God was a deliverer of His people. But you know what? What can we tell our people today? Because now we're living on this side of the cross. We can tell people how that God is the deliverer, not from Egyptian bondage, but from the bondage of sin. And what God has done for us. What God has done for us. And then there's a principle that is found in the book of Titus chapter 2. Titus chapter 2 gives us this principle. Older women teach the younger women. As a matter of fact, this might come as a shock to you, but listen as I read this. Titus chapter 2. Here's what you need to teach the younger women. To be discreet, chaste, keepers at home. You need to teach the younger women how to be good, how to be obedient to their own parents, or to their own husbands rather, that the Word of God be not blasphemed. Verse 4, that they may teach the young women to be sober, to love their husbands. What? Older women are to teach the younger women how to love their husbands? I've done a lot of weddings, and Brian, I know that you have as well, and I've never performed one ceremony, but what I doubted, that the husband loved the wife and the wife loved the husband. You know, but now here's Paul's telling Titus, you need to teach the older women, need to teach the young women how to love their husbands. Why? Because sooner or later the honeymoon ends. And then what happens? Life happens. Challenges come. And that as challenges come and as they're met, we need to be reminded of the love that we have for one another. That's right. And we need to teach our mothers how to love their children. Again, I've never seen a mama that didn't love that newborn. But yet older women are to teach the younger women how to love their children. There's a principle, folks. Older teach the younger. And so tonight, whenever we look, what can we learn from this? Have you looked at a principle that's found in the Old and New Testament alike? The principle is mentorship. That as Joshua was a successor to Moses, Moses had mentored Joshua, preparing him for be the next leader of God's people. Moses had prepared him. God had prepared Joshua so that whenever Moses died, Joshua stepped right in that leadership role. Another example of being a mentor is what Paul did. He mentored Timothy and Titus, young evangelists. And then we also have where the older men should teach the younger men. You know, older teach the younger. Just the same concept that goes back to Titus 2 about the women. Older women teach the younger women. That's biblical. Why is that important? That the older teach the younger. Look where the older people have come from. Look at all of the experiences. Look at all of the challenges that the older people, the older women and men have met in their life and have overcome. Look at all those difficulties that they have overcome. Look at the challenges. Look at the disappointments. Look at all of the life happens events that older people have already weathered and need to be taught those principles to the younger generations. And so we need to blend together. We need to blend together, all generations together. You know, what's really encouraging to see is when you come into a congregation, you visit there, and you see that the congregation is well mixed. That you just don't have one section for this age group, and this section for this age group, and this section for this age group, etc. That we're one church family. We're one church. We're a member of the body of Christ. We're members one of another. Younger, older, we're all members one of another. And we are missing out on a great resource today in the church when we, the younger generation, do not sit at the feet of the older because of the wisdom that those who have already experienced life and the wisdom and the knowledge that they have that they're able to share with us who are still in the trenches, raising children, trying to pay bills, etc., etc. We're missing out on a great resource to help us grow in our knowledge of God's Word and to grow to be a greater Christian when we do not avail ourselves to the older generation that is before us. There's that blending concept of the younger and the older. Adopt, young people, outside of family, adopt somebody. Spend time with some of the older members, be it men or women. Spend time with them and pick their brain. Talk about what they've experienced in life. How did you overcome this? What were you thinking back then? Because you know what? Sooner or later, what happened to you, the older, is going to happen to them, the younger. And then how are you going to deal with it? Then how are you going to deal with it? You see, we can't buy wisdom. We can't buy it. It don't come with age automatically. It comes through prayer and experience.